Hi everyone, I hope you are doing well. So today I wanted to make a little video on what it actually means to have a midlife crisis versus going through a spiritual awakening. Now the reason why I wanted to make this video is because there's a lot of people out there that might be experiencing a midlife crisis, but as they start to research what's happening to them, they may get it confused with the spiritual awakening. While the differences between the two are actually very subtle, there is actually a difference. And the reason why it's so important to understand this is because being able to identify what you're actually going through will help you find the right resources, the right support, so that you can actually work through what you're going through. So this video is really dedicated towards explaining the difference between a midlife crisis and a spiritual awakening and how they're really different. A midlife crisis can actually be explained as a psychological experience that one may go through primarily between your late 30s through to your 60s. And it's primarily rooted in fear of aging, looking back at your past and really regretting the loss of time, loss of opportunities, not finding the fulfillment with, uncompleted goals that you might have gone through in life. Now, one of the key things to understand here, which really separates this from a spiritual awakening, is that there is a huge focus on your identity, not having the physical identity that you want, which is very egoic in nature. And that is the key thing to really look out for when you're trying to differentiate between a midlife crisis versus a spiritual awakening. Now, some of the key symptoms to watch out for as you might be experiencing a midlife crisis is really sadness, boredom with life, having some impulsive desires to make quick changes so that you can find that satisfaction that you're looking for, that fulfillment you're looking for. There may be a lot of nostalgia, looking a lot into the past about unfulfilled goals, what you could have achieved had you really taken certain, actions or made different decisions with your life. So you are really stuck in framing a new identity based on decisions you didn't take in the right time and really being unsatisfied with where you truly are. Now, as I mentioned already, this is a lot to do with your egoic identity, how to restore that identity, how to bring more fulfillment from that physical identity. So that is what you really want to pay attention to if this is what you are going through. Now, a spiritual awakening is very different than a midlife crisis. And, that's something I talk a lot about on this channel. But just to kind of go over that and some of the key highlights here that can really help you tell this apart from what you experience in a midlife crisis is really that there could be an external event that you experience. This is some traumatic event, a loss of a loved one, whatever that may look like for you, but it results in a shift in consciousness. And this is when everything on the outside no longer appeals to you. However, the key thing to note here is that when you go through a spiritual awakening, the calling is not for fulfillment on the outside, but really it's an inner calling. You're being asked to look within about the deeper questions to life. What are you doing here? What is your purpose in life? And so you will find as you go through a spiritual awakening, you are looking for something more deeper than what you've really found in life. It's not to find some, fulfillment by something happening on your external reality, but it's to go deeper within. And that is going to help you lead to that true inner calling and maybe possibly discovering your purpose. And maybe that inner calling is leading you to that purpose, that higher calling that you're meant to really fulfill. However, what's really at the core of a spiritual awakening is going to figure out who you are at the soul level. And that is why you experience that ego death, that ego transcendence, and really have no longer those attachments. So, satisfaction from a job, a career is not really what you're looking for, but rather to find the truth about life and your existence in itself. Now, the important thing to understand here about a spiritual awakening versus a midlife crisis, and why people really get these confused, is because some of the overlap in symptoms that exist between both of these. Now, both of these, as you go through them, you could experience emotional chaos, chaos in your world, your relationships, the dissatisfaction of them all, and really the key one here is depression, where in a spiritual awakening, you may experience a spiritual depression as you're trying to figure out and restructure your life. You can similarly, in a midlife crisis, go through those same experiences, and therefore people have a hard time identifying what they're really going through. So it's really, really important to understand, the key item here is the ego. Are you trying to kill those old stories that are associated with your ego, or really trying to redefine who you are? And that can help you distinguish a midlife crisis from an actual spiritual awakening. Now, it is important to also note that you can actually be going through a midlife crisis. And if you resist the changes in that long enough, that can trigger a spiritual awakening. So it is quite possible that you can have both of these, but mostly it may start like a midlife crisis, and then that can trigger a spiritual awakening later on. Now, it's important to really understand the difference between a midlife crisis and a spiritual awakening, so that you may be able to find the most appropriate resources, the therapists, the counselors, and the right support as you go through these difficult and challenging times. So I really hope this video was helpful and you're able to find the right support depending on what you're actually going through. Thank you so much for listening. God bless.